When cops in Prairie Village, Kansas found Marti Hill beaten and stabbed in the basement of her own home, they were in shock.
It was the worst crime scene that I'd ever been involved in.
Doctors aren't sure she'll survive. Her injuries so extensive, her own family wasn't sure it was her.
When I walked into the room, I saw her in front of me. My first reaction was kind of fell to the ground. The only thing I could really recognize on her was her hands.
It's like blood creeping out of one of her eyes, besides the swelling of her face. So it was really hard to watch.
I was just in shock.
Marti was unconscious, and detectives knew they'd have to find a suspect without any help from their victim.
Had there been other attacks like this in your area?
No, there had not.
So you were starting at ground zero.
We were.
Sergeant Luke Roth and Detective Jason Wakefield were assigned as lead investigators on the case.
No sexual assault. There wasn't a robbery. No forced entry. Who were you thinking could have done this to her?
Initially, it was the ex-husband or a boyfriend that nobody knew about.
Marti had been divorced from Steve Hill for 7 years, but the two were in constant contact because they shared custody of daughter Mackenzie.
She'd have Mackenzie on the weekends and I'd have her during the week. So I saw Marti pretty regularly.
On the day of the attack, Steve had been trying to reach his daughter after school, but his calls were going unanswered.
I was getting a little frustrated with her because I kind of thought she was, dodging her dad.
It wasn't until late that evening that he learned what had happened.
Who told you?
The Prairie Village Police Department.
Cops called to say his ex-wife had been attacked and he was a person of interest.
Being the ex-husband, that I've watched enough television shows, I knew that they were coming to question me, and I didn't know the severity. I had no idea what had happened to her other than she'd been attacked in her home.
But Steve wasn't told how dire the situation actually was.
You had no idea that she was likely about to die.
No.
When cops came knocking at his door, Steve was more than happy to cooperate.
He did everything we asked. The best way to put it is he wanted to find out who did this just as much as we did.
Steve had an alibi for that morning. He told cops he brought his daughter to school, then he went to work. Before leaving, officers got a DNA sample.
They wanted to scrape underneath my fingernails and take hair follicle samples and all that stuff. So,
you allowed them to do all
of course.
that?
But until the DNA results came back and his alibi can be confirmed, Steve wasn't even allowed to see his daughter.
I couldn't get my daughter after school. They basically wanted to keep her away from me until they had eliminated me as a suspect.
To daughter Mackenzie, who was 15 years old at the time, it didn't make any sense.
I knew that he would never do anything like this to her, so that was really hard for me to understand at the time.
But like police, Marti's son, Stephen Kirby, thought everyone in his mom's life should be considered a suspect, even the man he once called stepdad.
In my head, he was a suspect, but he wasn't my number one. I felt like we were after somebody else.
And the same question lingered. Who would want to kill Marti Hill? Her family, friends, and co-workers had no idea.
Did you know if she had any enemies?
Oh, never. I can't even imagine in a million years that someone would.
But later that night, after detectives left Steve's house, a strange thought surfaced.
I just remembered somebody told me that she had had somebody working on her house. So I tried to call one of the detectives, and I ended up getting a voicemail on his cell phone, and I just left him a message.
Marti's mom, Shirley Roth, had already told cops about the handyman. She's the one who recommended Brian Pennington to her daughter after he did work on her own home.
It was stucco in the house, and he was just fine. He did a really nice job. He became a friend of ours.
Shirley hoped maybe Brian had seen something suspicious while working at her daughter's home. Something that could help with the investigation.
So right away, I looked at my phone and gave him Brian's telephone number.
Him being Sergeant Roth.
That was another person for you to look at.
Quite honestly, we were looking to see if he might have seen anybody at the house that was staying with Marti, that she may have been dating, that she may have been in communication with, because we had nothing to go with.
Detective Jason Wakefield first reached Brian Pennington by phone.
You call this person, and he agrees to meet with you.
He did.
It's a good sign.
He invited us to his house.
2 days after the brutal attack left Marti Hill at death's door, Detective Wakefield and Sergeant Roth head to the home of her handyman. Their entire 90-minute conversation with the father of two was recorded.
What did you think when you heard that Marti got attacked?
I really didn't know what to think. She's a really decent lady.
But even before going inside, a red truck in Brian's driveway sparked suspicion.
Do you regret that red one at all?
No, it just sits there.
The day of the attack, Marty's neighbor told cops she'd seen a beat-up red truck on their street.
She said she saw this truck around 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was being driven by a white male of smaller stature.
Then, another red flag, scratches on the handyman's face.
He told me they were from a pit bull. When I looked at him, it didn't appear they were dog scratches. It appeared they were more fingernail-type scratches.
Detectives asked Brian if he had been back to Marty's house since finishing the work 2 weeks earlier. He claimed that would have been impossible.
I'm so far in debt right now, I can't even afford to go to the gas station, really.
The entire time he talked about his financial struggles, where there was no way he could have drove to Prairie Village, Kansas, an hour and a half away.
His wife Jessica corroborated his alibi.
She said he was home all night with her.
With so much blood in Marty's basement, detectives were sure any suspect would have blood evidence on their clothes.
Hey, Brian, you don't have any clothes with any blood on them or anything like that, do you? No? You mind if I take a look real quick? Is that all right with you? Okay.
Brian agrees to let detectives search through the laundry hamper.
We had recovered a pair of jeans that had red stains that we could see on the hems and within the thigh portions.
But the handyman had an explanation.
You know what this stuff is on the bottom?
Grease,
Grease?
something, I don't know.
Not blood though, right?
By now, cops weren't buying it. Brian had quickly become their prime suspect. But could they push him to confess?
There's just so much evidence. I mean, it's overwhelming. Somebody's going to get caught for this. There's no doubt in my mind. Absolutely zero doubt. We just have to figure out why this happened. What do you want to tell us, Brian?
Really don't know anything.
Before leaving, detectives ask if they can take Brian's stained jeans.
Mind if I take these? That's all right? Okay.
When you left his house that night, and you were in the car on the way back, what was that conversation like with your partner?
We were shocked. We went to this house with the thought process that Brian might lead us to whoever was responsible. We now left the house thinking there was a good chance Brian was responsible and that we might have a key piece of evidence that could solve that.
Investigators delivered the jeans to the Johnson County Crime Lab. That very night, preliminary tests confirmed the stains are human blood. The next day, more confirmations. The blood matches Marti Hill. Cops were close to making an arrest. But before they pounced, Marty's family had some even bigger news to share.
We got a phone call that Marti had started talking.
Up next, beaten, stabbed, and left to die, Marti Hill defies the odds.
They all called her Miracle Marti.
Not only did she survive, Marti is naming her attacker. She's telling her harrowing story to Crime Watch Daily, and you won't believe what else she reveals.
At the same time, he grabs my neck. I just remember him holding so very tight, and when I'm trying to look, he was away from me.